Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about differential fluid, transfer case fluid, and manual transmission fluid. Are they all gear oil? Are they all 75W, whatever? Why does the transfer case take 75W in the newer ones? And more. Specifically, the information on manual transmission fluid. GL3, GL4, GL5, what's the best, what's what. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. If you are a returning subscriber, well, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Let's first talk about the differential fluid, or gear oil, or hypoid oil, or whatever you want to call it. Depends on who you buy from and who you ask. The main thing about them is there is the weight, 75W80, 75W85. That is the weight of the oil itself. Then there's the rating, or the API rating, GL1, GL3, GL4, GL5. That is the additive. That has to do with the additives that is in the fluid. Now, the main thing is, in most Toyotas, you're going to see GL5 used in differentials, transfer case, and all that. But manual transmissions, and this is a big deal that you understand this, because this is a very common misconception, does not use GL5. It actually uses GL3, according to Toyota. GL3 is very hard to find. It's actually kind of ancient and obsolete. GL4 is equivalent, and it works very well with manual transmissions. Now let's dive into why that is. What's the difference between GL4 and GL5? Because it is very important that you are aware of this. Not just, I'll use the same, it's just gear oil, it's gear oil. It is for the most part, but not with manual transmission, so you gotta be very careful with this. The original idea of this video was actually to show you how to replace the manual transmission fluid on this manual transmission Tacoma behind me. But we could not find GL4 readily available, believe it or not. And this is the most confusing thing. I took the owner, let's go shopping for some fluid, because he got the fluid behind me, which is wrong for the manual transmission. We could not find any. And that was very interesting. Basically, every parts store you walk in, oh, gear oil, here it is. Just buy it, dump it, call it a day. Well, that's not how this works. So let's talk about the difference between GL5 and GL4. It is in the additive. It's something called an EP additive. It's basically the sulfur and phosphorus content. So GL5 will have twice as much of this additive package as the GL4. Now, that sounds like all technical lingo and very complicated. Okay, what does that mean in the real world? Well, that means for differentials, front differential, rear differential, transfer case, it's all good, because this is going to protect you in that high pressure area, which is, the axles are driving the car and all that. But in a manual transmission, it's basically the same thing. Manual transmissions, they don't have the same load as a differential, but there is one thing about manual transmissions that you need to be aware of. Manual transmissions have synchros or synchro mesh, or whatever the word you want to use here. That synchro is made of soft metals, usually copper or bronze or something of that nature. Now, this specific additive, when it is in twice the amount, will actually start attacking these rings and wear them out. So basically, the fluid will chew up these synchros, not wear and tear. So when you go using GL5 in a manual transmission, initially everything will be great, because you just put new fluid, everything's smooth and nice. But then as you start driving, and the next time you change that fluid, yep, you're going to see a distinct yellow line or very fine yellow material in the fluid, because that fluid just attacked these soft metals and chewed them up. And then eventually you're going to get to a point where shifting into gears is going to become harder and harder, and you basically, because of lack of understanding and maintenance, you basically ruined your manual transmission. You want to replace these synchros? Sure, they're not expensive, but the labor is, because you got to pull that trans out, tear it apart, and replace them physically. There's no way to do it outside. Definitely not a DIY job. So all that because of lack of education on the fluid. Folks, this is super, super important that you are fully aware of this fluid thing. And when you go to the parts store, and I literally just came back from the parts store with the owner of this truck behind me, and I can see how this can get super confusing. So let's talk about this for a bit. Behind me is two kinds of differential fluids. One of them is the one that the customer brought. It is AMSOIL. AMSOIL makes good product, a little bit on the overpriced side, but nonetheless, at least they're good. This, I'm gonna show you a picture of the back label. Let's read it together, how confusing this can be. Use in standard and limited slip differentials and manual transmissions. This is where most people stop. Yeah, it's good for manual transmission, we're good. But you gotta read the rest of this. This is very important. It says, and manual transmissions that require any of the following specifications. API GL5. That's it. I'm not going to read the rest, because this Tacoma, when you look up the actual specifications for the Tacoma, it says GL3. This is clearly telling you GL5. However, GL3 is actually obsolete. Even Toyota is super expensive and really hard to find, because no dealer will use that, I don't know, $100 a quart fluid. And that is actually not the greatest fluid in the world. GL3 is obsolete. GL4 does the same thing. It has that additive, but it has it at a much less concentration, so it's safe on the soft metals. But when you go to the parts store, you're going to see the most confusing thing on all the bottles, and they all have the same problem. You're going to see, well, this says GL5, but then it also says GR4, but it kind of mixes it up in a way that it makes you wonder, is this the right fluid? No, folks. You cannot use GL5 in a manual transmission, because you're on your way to damaging these synchros and you're going to have a lot of problems. It's not worth it. Take your time in getting the right fluid. If you go on, let's take the example of AMSOIL. You know, we're dealing with this one. This specifically says severe gear. If you go to the website of AMSOIL, they actually sell a fluid that looks like just like this. It says manual transmissions on it, and it says GL4. That is the one you want to use for manual transmissions, and that is the one you should be using. Please don't make the mistake of using GL5 in a manual transmission. Some people will say, oh, I've used it, nothing happened. Well, you're lucky, because science is science, and it's only a matter of time before these synchros are damaged. And now let's talk about transfer cases, because there's a large debate about those. At some point in the early 2010s, Toyota switched to using 75W only flat weight on their transfer cases. Many people have debated this, what's going on. Now, it's still GL5, but why are they using only a different fluid that costs $85 a pint, and it is super expensive, and what's the deal with that? Now, here's the God honest truth. If you use, say, this 75W90, this is a little bit thicker, but you're going to lose 0.12356 miles per gallon, and the world will not end. Nothing really will happen damage-wise, and that's about it. So up to you. Do you want to save that 3 cents and 23.2 cents over the next fill-up by spending $85 on a bottle of, I don't know, golden fluid? Or would you like to let go of the 3.2 cents that you're going to save on gas and buy the normal price stuff? It doesn't have to be AMSOIL. I think AMSOIL is overpriced, but good fluid, good quality. Could be Valvoline, could be Mobil 1, could be Liquid Moly. Just don't overpay for this stuff. I'd rather you change this stuff more often than overpay for it. And by the way, and here's a recommendation for fluid interval in the transfer case, which you can use 75W90, you can use 75W80, 85. Depends on your temperature. Basically use the same fluid in the front differential, rear differential, and the transfer case. You're not going to have problems. This has been done for a long time and nothing really happened. You want to change your fluid every 30,000 miles on your differential, transfer case, manual transmission, and your rear end. Very simple. If you do heavy off-roading, you do a lot of snow driving where you're always really loading this four-wheel drive system, then perhaps consider every 15,000 miles, but I still think that's a little bit border overkill. But if you're doing a DIY, some of these fluids are really cheap and you don't really need a lot of knowledge, or anybody can crawl under it, especially in the trucks. Crawl underneath it, drain the fluid, fill it up till it overfills. Life's good. Very simple. I'd rather you don't invest in a very expensive fluid for the sake of protection. I'd rather you do it more often and it ends up being the same, because in the end, it's about the additive package and how clean that oil is, not really about this is expensive so it must be better. It's not. It really is not. Before we wrap up this video, I want to say one thing about Toyota. See, when I look at this liquid moly bottle, it's going to say MB approved, blah, blah, basically Mercedes-Benz approved. When you look at this bottle, it'll say MT1, MILPRF this, Dana that, all these specifications. And in the end, it'll say Ford, GM, Chrysler. Many of these companies will have, kind of like Dextron when it came out, they'll have their own specification, and because they have more time to spend on these acronyms than actually the quality of their car, they give them names. So now we have these mini brands, MT1, MT whatever. Toyota does not have that. They just don't. They rarely call their fluids a name. I mean, the biggest thing you're gonna get is ATFWS. World standard. You can tell whoever came out with the name of this automatic transmission fluid really did not bother to think about the name too much. What does world standard mean? Don't know, don't care. They're more worried about making reliable cars than the names. So Toyota does not have specification for this. They'll just tell you GL5. Here's the weight, GL5 or GL3 or whatever the case the application is, or equivalent. They don't have names. So when you go choosing fluid, go by the GL5. And to summarize this whole video, to make things more clear, on manual transmissions, replace the fluid every 30,000 miles. On differentials and transfer cases, the same interval. If you do heavy off-roading, heavy use, you could potentially consider 15,000 miles. I'll leave that one up to you. On manual transmissions, always use GL4, never use GL5. On differential and transfer case, you can use GL5. On the transfer case, you can use multi-weight. You don't have to stick with that 75W. Lose the 3.2 cents versus the very expensive fluid. I hope this video is helpful and informative, and this video was birthed out of on the spot, in the moment, because this customer brought me this car. They wanted to do a manual transmission fluid replacement, but they brought the fluid, which is okay, that's okay, but they brought the wrong fluid. And at some point, we went to the parts store, we're trying to find the right fluid, we couldn't find it because everybody will have all this confusion. Oh, gear oil's gear oil. Well, it's not. And we couldn't find it. It was very frustrating because I'm reading the labels on these bottles. I'm like, oh my God, this is so confusing. It says all three of them on the same package. Well, which one is it? Be careful of this because you want to get the right fluid for this. GL4. You need something that specifically says GL4 and nothing else. Not say GL5, but it's compatible with GL4. That's not the same. Be very careful with this, please. I hope this video was helpful or informative. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.